Welcome to part 3 of The Abolition of Work, an essay by Bob Black. We were returning to continue the narration and commentary on this imaginative and convincing criticism of modern work. I recommend that you watch parts 1 and 2 of this essay, published in 2 earlier videos. As the essay continues, our author is going to hone in on how our modern culture indoctrinates us into accepting work as natural and a choice, when in fact it is nothing of the sort. He continues to dissect the assumptions we make and how these assumptions would be utterly baffling to our ancestors. As usual, Bob pulls no punches as he shows employment for the massive scam it really is. Quote, "The demeaning system of domination I've described rules over half the waking hours of a majority of women and the vast majority of men for decades, for most of their lifespans. For certain purposes, it's not too misleading to call our system democracy or capitalism, or better still, industrialism. But its real names are factory fascism and office oligarchy. Anybody who says these people are free is lying or stupid. You are what you do. If you do boring, stupid, monotonous work, chances are you'll end up boring, stupid, and monotonous. Work is a much better explanation for the creeping cretinization all around us than even such significant moronizing mechanisms as television and education. People who are regimented all their lives, handed off to work from school and bracketed by the family in the beginning and the nursing home in the end, are habituated to hierarchy and psychologically enslaved. Their aptitude for autonomy is so atrophied that their fear of freedom is among their few rationally grounded phobias. Their obedience training at work carries over into the families they start, thus reproducing the system in more ways than one, and into politics, culture, and everything else. Once you drain the vitality from people at work, they'll likely submit to hierarchy and expertise in everything. They're used to it." Close quote. God, I love this section. It was one of the most uncomfortable parts of my corporate career. The unremitting similarity of almost everyone. They talked about sports, they talked about cars and the weather and their kids. They complained about airlines and traffic and taxes. When they were given some free time, the horrifying predictability of the golf course was their release. The usual Monday morning discussions were mostly blandly the same. What did you do on the weekend? I went out to golf with some buddies on Saturday morning, and we had some friends over for drinks and a barbecue in the afternoon. Sunday morning I got up early for a run or a bike and then off to brunch, or I sat myself on the couch to watch whatever locally popular sport being broadcast. I felt like an alien in that world. I could never be sure whether I was strange or somehow all my colleagues had become more adept at appearing interested in this carefully prescribed and oh so normal life. To me, it all seemed so much sameness, even though my activities were just as mundane. It was so perfectly basic, bro. I mean, there's nothing wrong with liking TV sports and playing golf, but I couldn't figure out why it was so much completely common to most. Why so many lives make up so much common beige acceptability. Of course it makes sense if we believe that the human being is a trainable or even programmable animal. We all went to similar schools and were taught similar lessons by similar teachers. We were all exposed to relentless, repetitive exhortations to accept the same values and all similarly punished when we rebelled. We all sat mindless and transfixed in front of the same media and were bombarded by the same messages. In fact, it's a miracle that any of us are able a modicum of independent thought. The brutality of this banality was underlined by its ubiquity. It was inescapable and all-encompassing. Is it any wonder that being unique is now reduced to the color of trainers you choose? Is it any wonder that normality is so normal? Is it any wonder that work or career has become so unquestioned? No, it's a perfectly understandable adaptation to a lifetime of brainwashing. So many unique, intelligent humans reduced to so many predictable, reliable, responsible cattle. And as much as part of my mind is rebelling, well, moo. Quote, "We are so close to the world of work that we can't see what it does to us. We have to rely on outside observers from other times or other cultures to appreciate the extremity and the pathology of our present position. There was a time in our own past when the work ethic would have been incomprehensible. And perhaps Weber was on to something when he tied its appearance to a religion. Calvinism, which if it emerged today instead of 4 centuries ago, would immediately and appropriately be labeled a cult. Be that as it may, we have only draw upon the wisdom of antiquity to put work in perspective. The ancients saw work for what it is, and their view prevailed, the Calvinist cranks notwithstanding, until overthrown by industrialism, but not before receiving the endorsement of its prophets." Closed quote. The Weber referenced here is Max Weber, the German social theorist of the early 20th century. One of his famous creations was the Protestant ethic thesis, a non-Marxist genealogy of modern capitalism. The theory posits that capitalism, with its rigid moral demand for taking full responsibility for all individual behavior, and linking that tightly to work as a demonstration of man's morality. This theory was one of a couple theses that helped launch Weber's reputation as one of the founding theorists of modernity. Of course, our modern work ethic has shed itself of its overt religiousness, but the same moral belief in the goodness of work has become fully internalized and generally accepted. Whenever you meet a baseball cap wearing workman yelling about how the millennials are lazy, just know that you've met the Protestant work ethic in all its fundamentalist glory. The Protestant work ethic always reminds me of evangelical Christians in the US. According to the Friendly Atheist here on YouTube, the only growing segment of American Christians are evangelicals. Yet, even this group reports rapidly declining church attendance. So what gives? Friendly's analysis concludes that there are a group who adopt the label of evangelical because they are Trump-loving, neoconservative, free market, and Christian nation types. But they aren't religious per se, which doesn't make any sense until you accept that there is a very deep river of Puritan, Protestant, Calvinist Christianity running smack dab through the middle of Middle America. For these most ideologically consistent of the illogical masses, capitalism, freedom, Christianity, and white wealth simply belong together. Many of them talk about losing the America they grew up in, or about how America used to be great and now it's not. They will talk about how the hard-working middle class have been abandoned. They will rage about academics and the liberal elite. But we all know that this isn't what this is really about. It's really about how their lives have become harder in post-Reagan America and how they don't understand or feel comfortable in the new America that is emerging. So they seek a return to a safer and recognizable past where gender and biology were the same thing, where homosexuality at best was tolerated in the back rooms and in New York, but didn't show up with colored hair at a pride march in downtown Pittsburgh, where most people went to boring Sunday morning church services with their 3.5 kids, and you could say anything about brown people just so long as you didn't take the Lord's name in vain. Just as Luddites were a cultural backlash dressed up as a labor movement, the Trumpists are a cultural backlash dressed up as a political one. Both groups, unfortunately, will smash things given the chance. Quote, let's pretend for a moment that work doesn't turn people into stultified submissives. Let's pretend, in defiance of any plausible psychology and the ideology of its boosters, that it has no effect on the formation of character. And let's pretend that work isn't as boring and tiring and humiliating as we all know it really is. Even then, work would still make a mockery of all humanistic and democratic aspirations, just because it usurps so much of our time. Socrates said that manual laborers make bad friends and bad citizens because they have no time to fulfill the responsibilities of friendship and citizenship. He was right. Because of work, no matter what we do, we keep looking at our watches. The only thing free about so-called free time is that it doesn't cost the boss anything. Free time is mostly devoted to getting ready for work, going to work, returning from work, and recovering from work. Free time is a euphemism for the peculiar way labor as a factor of production not only transports itself at its own expense to and from the workplace, but assumes primary responsibility for its own maintenance and repair. Coal and steel don't do that. Lathes and typewriters don't do that, but workers do. No wonder Edward G. Robinson, in one of his gangster movies, exclaimed, "Work is for saps." Close quote. Isn't this a breathtakingly clear observation? Not only are we expected to work extremely hard at whatever stultifying job that we've been given, but no one ever remunerates us for the endless effort, cost, and time that go into getting us to our jobs. Fed, groomed, and dressed on time from homes chosen on the basis of their proximity to our jobs, all to satisfy the expectation of our employers. Everyone accepts this robotic compliance in silence. Everyone believes somehow that these choices were free ones, but clearly they are not free in any way. There is already a tremendous amount of unrewarded overtime that we accept in order to satisfy our employers. But even less enumerated are the almost endless list of life choices sacrificed to allow us to work. This perspective tears at whatever tattered illusions we still hold about our free society. Of course we take pride in our hard work. To do the opposite is to descend into the horrifying grief that accompanies our debasement. Quote, both Plato and Xenophon attribute to Socrates and obviously share with him an awareness of the destructive effects of work on the worker as a citizen and as a human being. Herodotus identified contempt for work as an attribute of classical Greeks at the zenith of their culture. To take only one Roman example, Cicero said that whoever gives his labor for money sells himself and puts himself in the rank of slaves. His candor is now rare, but contemporary primitive societies, which we are wont to look down upon, have provided spokesmen who have enlightened Western anthropologists. Take the Capac of West Irion, according to Paspasil, have a conception of balance in life and accordingly work only every other day, the day of rest designed to regain the lost power and health. Our ancestors, even as late as the 18th century, when they were far along the path of our present predicament, at least were aware of what we have forgotten, the underside of industrialization. Their religious devotion to Saint Monday, thus establishing a de facto 5-day week 150 to 200 years before its legal consecration, was the despair of the earliest factory owners. They took a long time submitting to the tyranny of the bell, predecessor of the time clock. In fact, it was necessary for a generation or two to replace adult males with women accustomed to obedience and children who could be molded to fit industrial needs. Even the exploited peasants of the Ancien regime wrested substantial time back from their landlord's work. According to Lafarge, a fourth of the French peasants' calendar was devoted to Sundays and holidays. Chayanov's figures from villages in Tsarist Russia, hardly a progressive society, likewise show 4/5 of peasants' days devoted to repose. Controlling for productivity, we are obviously far behind these backward societies. The exploited musics wouldn't wonder why any of us are working at all. So should we, close quote. Some clarifications as I found myself furiously Googling after first reading this paragraph. The Kapaku of West Irian are a trading and farming tribe from Papua New Guinea who live in small rural villages. They have a primitive capitalist economy based on cowrie shell currency and individualism. Bob seems to be suggesting that the economic system is not our only problem. Our attitudes to work have made it all the much worse. The Ancien Regime refers to the feudal system of France from the late Middle Ages through until the Revolution, and musics are Russian peasants. Bob also proposes a theory that the evil child labor conditions of the Industrial Revolution had to do with the resistance of unindoctrinated adult men to the conditions of factory work. It is well documented that some factories employed workforces comprised of up to 90% children. The website of the Economic History Association describes the phenomenon as follows, quote, "Managers and overseers saw other advantages to hiring children and pointed out that children were ideal factory workers because they were obedient, submissive, likely to respond to punishment, and unlikely to form unions. In addition, since the machines had reduced many procedures to simple one-step tasks, unskilled workers could replace skilled workers. Finally, a few scholars argue that the nimble fingers, small stature, and suppleness of children were especially suited to the new machinery and work situations. They argue that children had a comparative advantage with the machines that were small and built low to the ground, as well as in the narrow underground tunnels of coal and metal mines. The Industrial Revolution, in this case, increased the demand for child labor by creating work situations where they could be very productive," close quote. I think this is the most cogent argument against modern work that I've ever read. So that ends part 3 of The Abolition of Work by Bob Black. Thanks for following along. Part 4 should be uploaded within a week. If you'd like to be notified, subscribe. And as always, this is XCG wishing you speed on your road to freedom.